We thank you for all those who make our work possible. We thank you for many who have been serving people who have had to carry the burden of the HIV/AIDS, for the courage you've given them, for the strength to persevere and to educate others, for the love that they've been shown by many, for the care, and for the support they've received. We thank you for those who continue to write about this pandemic, that the Lord may inspire them not only to tell their stories, but also inspire them to tell the stories of so many heroes, heroines, and those who commit themselves to transforming our society today. We ask you to be with us today as we launch the book, AIDS 30 Years Down the Line, that this may be a continuation of the good work that the church and many other institutions continue to do, and that through the inspiration of the writers, we may be strengthened, we may be informed and educated, and we may be inspired to do even more. We ask this in the name of Jesus the Lord. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So once again, welcome to this book launch by African Jesuit AIDS Network, AJAN. And again, sorry for the delay in beginning our program today. My name is Father Elias Omondi. I'm the director of the Jesuit Institute of Peace Studies and International Relations, a Jesuit priest from Kenya. And I'm very glad to be here with you today in this very special day, special occasion. I'd like in a special way to say thank you and welcome to Father Michael Lewis, the Superior of Jesuits in Africa. I'd like to also say a word of thank you and welcome to Father Roberto Agbonkiamege, who is the Jesuit Superior of Jesuits of the province of Eastern Africa. I'd like, of course, not to welcome our host, but to say that he's here with us today, Father Patan Mombe, who is the director of the Africa Jesuit AIDS Network. And of course, our special speaker and keynote addresser, Professor Mary Getui, who is here with us today, and is the chair of the National AIDS Control Council, and also the director of the Directorate of Quality Assurance here at Catholic University of Eastern Africa. We also welcome Ms. Florence Anam, who will also be one of our speakers. So now I would like to invite forward our main guests today. First, I'd like to invite Patan Mombe, our host, to take up the seat. And then Father Roberto as well. Professor Mary Getui. Ms. Florence Anam. So at this juncture, I'd like to invite Father Patan Mombe to give us an address. And Patan, as I've said, is one of the co-editors of the book. Patan, welcome.
Now that the young people talked about my shoes, I don't know how to walk. Yeah. Yes. Reverend Father Mike Lewis, President of the Conference of the Jesuit Superiors of Africa and Madagascar. Reverend Father Robato Agbon Kiamege, Provincial of Eastern Africa, Province of the Society of Jesus. Professor Mary Getui, Chairperson of the National AIDS Control Council, all representatives of different organizations present in his room, most valued and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great joy that I would like to follow the steps of our chairperson of this event, Father Elias Omondi, Director of Ekima Peace Institute, to wish you all a warm welcome to the launch of AJAN's latest publication entitled AIDS 30 Years Down the Line, Faith-Based Reflection about the Epidemic in Africa. I wished to express in a special way my profound gratitude to you for all the sacrifices you made, leaving your occupations behind, to respond to our invitation to participate in this modest event. Your presence speaks about your interest in the work of AJAN, the African Jesuit AIDS Network, and the battle against AIDS, which we need as the continent the most affected to hone, scale up, and sustain. May the Lord bestow on us His blessings and continue to crown our efforts and work with success and joy. Today, my role as the co-editor of the book is basically to share with you some elements of the genesis of this book. Those who will come after me, namely my co-editor, Father Bato, and Professor Getui, will lead us in discovering the actual content of the book from various angles. Ladies and gentlemen, to kill an elephant requires many arrows. This saying, rooted in the experience of our traditional societies, came to mind when I first saw the ensemble of contribution to the book being launched today. Essentially, the 29 fine contributions that make up the book reflect upon the response to AIDS in sub-Saharan Africa over the past 3 decades, particularly, but not only, the input of the Church. Taken together, they offer a comprehensive picture of the many challenges posed by AIDS to individuals, families, communities, and nations, as well as the multifaceted response required to deal with these challenges at all these levels. They show us that taking a linear approach to AIDS, focusing on one aspect alone, will never be successful. addressing AIDS is not only about sex, just as it is not only providing medicines. One arrow, however well-aimed and powerful, would not be enough to kill this dangerous elephant. To have maximum impact, we need many arrows fired in a planned, coordinated attack, and only after taking careful aim. We need an approach that is holistic and wide-ranging. The wide array of keen perspectives shared by the authors is precisely what we, as AJAN, wanted to achieve when we set out on this exciting project to publish a book to mark the 30th anniversary of the first diagnosed case of AIDS, which was in 1981. Embarking on such a project was entirely in line with the vision and mission of AJAN, which seeks to foster an informed and compassionate approach to AIDS care and HIV prevention among Jesuits and the wider church on this continent. We do this partly by harnessing the academic, research, and communications capacity of the Jesuits to reflect on the AIDS pandemic and on the ways we are called to act to mitigate its impact. On a more practical level, we also ask Jesuits and others in the church who are doing AIDS ministry to reflect on and share the lessons learned in their practical experience. Thus, over the years, AJAN has published several books of theological, spiritual, and sociological reflection, as well as concrete guidelines for AIDS ministry in collaboration with the Paulines publication in Africa. I wish to take this opportunity to heartily thank the Paulines, represented here by Sister Millicent, for this fruitful collaboration and to augur that it may continue well into the future. Back to the book being launched today. We started the project in June 2011, the month of the unhappy 30th anniversary of the first AIDS diagnosis, by issuing a call for papers. However, our deliberation started much before this, as we spent some time determining what kind of publication we wanted. From the start, it was clear to us that we needed to have a mosaic that covered social, cultural viewpoints, human rights, and ethical consideration, the burning issue of universal access, as well as the concrete church, the church response in theory and practice. In January 2012, AJAN organized a conference in Nairobi where contributors to the book presented their papers and listened to responses prepared by fellow contributors and others. My co-editor, Father Bato, described the event as a conversation among people who are passionate about our ministry with people with HIV and AIDS, to see where we have succeeded, what challenges we have encountered, and what new frontier is available to us, beckoning to us to cross in this ministry. This is also a good way of describing the book we are launching today, a rich and stimulating conversation which shows how far we have gone, but also how far we are yet to go. This conversation is but a step on the way in a long process to defeat AIDS, to have no more new infections, and to bring life to the full, the vision of AJAN, to people infected and affected. Before bringing my word to an end, allow me to make a short excursus into the content of the book to echo the point raised by James Keenan, who recalls philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein's insight that if lions could speak, we could not understand them. He goes on to state that unless we have the same language, we cannot and do not understand one another. My feeling is that 30 years in the pandemic, the lack of shared language has been at the heart of the relationship between Catholic organizations like AJAN and the secular world. This has been expressed in the lack of support by some key international institutions for the considerable work of the Church in HIV and AIDS. According to a study completed in 2008, only 5.4% of global fund grants were received by faith-based organizations. Only 5.4%. In the case of the Catholic Church, this miscommunication is mainly rooted in the long-running condom controversy, which recently appeared in Kenyan society once again. I do not propose to get into this neuralgic controversy here, except to make one point. As we agree to disagree on the condom, which offers only 80% effective protection, let us rather invest all our energies in areas where we speak the same language. And it seems to me that today we already have one crucial area where we are speaking the same language: antiretroviral treatment. Antiretroviral treatment, which, besides keeping people alive, ensures 96% protection from HIV infection. All of us need to work very hard together to ensure that all those who need to have access to this treatment, this preventive and therapeutic treatment, may have access to it. This is something AJAN is working on very hard. We are just embarking on a campaign to advocate for access to ART in several African countries, while the book launched today has an entire section on the subject. As in every other section of the book, the authors show not only their keen knowledge and experience of the issue at stake, but also their passion in striving for universal access to treatment. Our hope, my hope for this book, is that it will make a real and valuable contribution to fostering a more informed and compassionate response to people infected, affected, and vulnerable to HIV and AIDS. And also that the book content gives hope that, as Cardinal Olufemi Onyeikan said, there is life after HIV. Let us continue to work to make this hope a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Patan Mombe. He was the second director of the African Jesuit AIDS Network and has given us a general overview of what you will find in this book. And just to mention that the book is available upstairs. The Pauline sisters are selling a copy, so please, there's no exit without this copy. Just take that note. And I think, as you will see, the book also raises some serious dilemmas that we often are faced with when we talk of the infections of HIV and AIDS, and for people living with HIV and AIDS. The infection rates in Kenya are now registered since 2008 at 7%, which is still reasonably high. And we've also seen increased infection rates among couples, much more than among younger people. So there's a need, again, to raise concern and some education among couples, especially the young couples. Other dilemmas like between the medical practitioners and the teaching of the church and the cultural practices and social practices, you'll find some of those issues discussed also in this book. I'd now like to invite Father Roberto to give us his address as well. Father Roberto is a superior and provincial of the Jesuit of Eastern Africa and also has written about HIV and AIDS from a pastoral perspective.
Thank you very much. Mine is not an address. Pat has done that very, very well, and I would like to say all protocols observed. I would like to begin by thanking you, each one of you, for coming to this book launch. If we had this event 20 years ago, this hall would be packed with people of from different walks of life who are engaged in HIV/AIDS ministry. Today, we're just a handful, and I think that indicates several things. It could indicate that we have made a lot of progress. And therefore, the pandemic is no longer deserving of the kind of passion and commitment and activism that it commanded 2 decades ago. But it could also signal a rather, what I would consider a dangerous trend, that we have perhaps become complacent, that as far as we are concerned in the wider society, there is nothing to worry about. And I think that's dangerous. Because we know that 30 years later, it remains a challenging global crisis. That is the pandemic of HIV and AIDS. It is a global crisis. Perhaps we talk less about it now, but HIV/AIDS is still with us. And as we say, we are either infected or we are affected. One of the ways in which it is described in this book is that it is a storm. It is a storm. And it may not be so obvious or full-blown storm as it used to be, but the impact on the continent of Africa is still quite devastating. We have seen several figures that tell us that there is a rather downward trend in terms of infection rates in some countries. We have also noticed a significant increase in the use of ARTs, or antiretroviral drugs. And we have noticed that there is progress. But this is progress that should not lull our conscience. This is progress that should not send us to sleep or make us disengage from what we normally describe as the fight against AIDS. So it's important that we talk about it, and we continue to talk about it. That is one of the goals of this book, to talk about it. Pat used the word conversation. To have a conversation about something that has caused such devastation across the globe. To keep us focused on what we need to do to push back this pandemic and eventually overcome this pandemic. So I would like to recognize the work that the contributors have done as conversation partners to put out and publish this book. We don't have all the contributors here. There are a few who have managed to make it to this occasion. I'd like to just recognize their presence by asking the contributors to please stand. The contributors, Michael Ocheng, Eric Simiyu, James Canali. Thank you very much. Daniela Vela will not get a chance to talk, but I also want to thank her for her contribution to the editorial work. Thank you very much. The book is divided into several sections, 5 sections in fact. The first section attempts to introduce some ethical perspectives. What are the new ways in which we can begin to look at this pandemic? What are some of the new ways that we can understand it so that we don't end up focusing our energies on useless controversies? And Pat just mentioned to us that there are areas where we can have a common and shared language. So the first part tries to do that, to set the conversation in a wide theoretical framework that allows us to speak meaningfully to one another. The second section looks at some of the socioeconomic and cultural factors that determine or shape the progress of this pandemic. What are some of the myths that we promote? What are some of the misconceptions that we've developed, the stereotypes, the prejudices that we have designed that continue to militate against progress in this fight against HIV and AIDS? The third section looks at human rights issues. Now, for some, it might seem strange that we will use the expression human rights in talking about HIV and AIDS. We have looked at it in different optics in the past as a security problem, as a moral problem, etc. But it is also fundamentally a rights question. And so some of those issues are treated in this book. It is a rights question from the perspective of gender. It is a rights question from the perspective of access to treatment and care. It's a rights question from the perspective of the commitment of resources by governments and organizations, a fact that Pat just alluded to. The fourth section looks at the question of universal access. With the ART becoming more and more available, the question then is who gets access to it and on what conditions. So the contributors deal extensively with this question of access. The fifth section is what I consider the most interesting part of this conversation. It looks at the role and the response of the church to HIV and AIDS. One of the contributors, Vitio, Robert, tells us that when it comes to responding to HIV and AIDS, the church's approach or the church's contribution is second to none. But that's not something we hear in the regular media. Because when church participation in the fight against HIV and AIDS comes up for debate and conversation, it gets bogged down by the usual issues. Condoms, condoms, and more condoms. But what we realize, though, is that if we have reached this point 30 years later, and we can identify some aspects of progress, we owe this to the many women, especially women and men in the church who have been at the forefront of responding to this challenge. And I would say we cannot thank these women and men enough for what they have done in the name of the church. And when we speak of church, it is important that we recognize that it's not about bishops, it's not about the hierarchy, it's about the people at the forefront. The people who accompany women and men living with AIDS, the people who provide care, the people who provide advocacy, the people who stand by them. That's church also. When you look at this book, you realize that there is a big gap. It's a conversation, we say, but there is no voice in the book that is the voice of someone who is actually living with HIV and AIDS. I think we cannot speak for people living with HIV and AIDS. We cannot pretend to speak for them. We need to learn to listen to their voices and to let them articulate their own needs and situations. However, I would like to say that 30 years later, there is evidence that the conversation about HIV and AIDS has become more civilized, less acrimonious, and more constructive. That is certainly the aim of the contributors of this book, to continue to contribute to a more civilized, constructive conversation about HIV and AIDS. My friends, I believe that this pandemic is still with us. 30 years later, we cannot relent in our effort to overcome it. And for the contributions that this book makes to this fight against HIV and AIDS, I would like to thank the contributors as well as the fellow editors. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bato, for your words. So now I'd like to welcome Florence Anam, who is the Advocacy Officer at the National Empowerment Network, to come and speak to us also about today's launch and her experiences in the work that she's currently doing. You're very welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Just as I start, I would like to echo the words of the speaker who has just left, that I was a bit baffled that there was no person living with HIV contributing to the book. But all is not lost. I am standing here and I will represent at this joint. So thank you again for the opportunity. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to stand here. I stand here in two regards. First, I am an employee of NEFAC. NEFAC stands for the National Empowerment Network of People Living with HIV in Kenya. It is a network that jointly, brings together all groups of people living with HIV through support groups, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, women, youth, children, organizations, to have a collective voice, mostly for advocacy, to ensure that the rights of people living with HIV, and especially around access to treatment and care and right-based approaches to programming is concerned. I am the advocacy officer in that organization. Secondly, but most importantly, I stand here as a young woman living with HIV. And therefore representing people living with HIV from all walks of life. Some who are probably in this room with me, many who could not make it here today. But I believe that in my talking to you, in being part of this conversation, I will try, I may not do all of it, to sort of articulate some of the things that we say or we feel around HIV programming. So on behalf of people living with HIV, I would like to congratulate AJAN and everyone who contributed to the book, to the launch of the book AIDS 30 Years Down the Line. This book, I have had the privilege of reading it, thanks to a very good group that made sure I had it in time, provides essays that are both informative and educative. But other than that, they provide evidence that there is so much work that the Catholic Church, just as one of many other faith-based organizations, are doing or contributing towards the HIV and AIDS response. This is something we don't hear about. Maybe that is why we don't have the room at full capacity. A friend of NEFAC always tells us, if it is not documented, it never happened. So if we don't get to hear it, if people are not reading it, documentation is really important. So if people are not reading it or hearing it, it never happened. We can sit and pat ourselves in the back and look at the magnificence of our missions, but if people are not reading it, it just never happened. So thank you very much. In reading the book, I was taken back to a time when I tested, which is tested positive, which is coincidentally this month, about 8 years ago. the first thing I did, it was a Saturday, I think, but the first thing I did on Monday was get to work way earlier than my colleagues, because we only had one computer that had network. 8 years ago, it wasn't as easy to access internet here. I think the cyber cafes would still charge about 7 shillings a minute, so you waited to go to work, and I don't even think we had internet-enabled phones. But the reason why I went to work early was because I wanted to read about this disease that, up until that fateful Saturday, was something that happened somewhere else, not within my life or anywhere around the scope of my life. After all, if we recall very well, it has always been presented as a disease for a certain social class of people. I didn't fit into it. I did not want to be stigmatized into the prejudices that arose at the time, and so I did not want to share it with anyone. But when I went to work, the first thing I did was Google, and I wanted information. How do I handle this without involving anyone? And there was nothing. Even if it was there, it was not within my context. There was no one that I would latch my problems to, no direction. Things have changed, and that is why probably I think I stand here as a person living with HIV, representing others in rejoicing in the launch of this book, because it has become so easy for people to access information nowadays. And this is because of the magnificent work that we do, but most importantly, because of the selfless efforts of writers who sit day and night to write about it. I think it must be true that all of us want to read. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of mine, she was actually a college roommate, called me crying, and she had gone to clinic for something, and then while she was there, the VCT was there, and she thought, why not? And in the end, she was HIV positive. So the first person she thought to call, good idea, she knew me, was me. And she was crying, and I was sick, and I had a cold, but I told her to give me an hour and I would be with her. But within that time, or within the hour, when I got to her house, I found a bubbly girl, and she was chatting, and she was telling me about everything she has read. And that is how much information is powerful. In my time, I couldn't access it. In her time, 8 years later, it was on her phone. She could access it just at the click of buttons. And it gave her so much joy that she understood what the disease was, what the conversations have been, and where and what other options are there for her to seek treatment. The authors of this book, I would like to thank all of them, the ones in the room and those who are not there, please pass our gratitude, have done a great job in addressing various issues about HIV and AIDS response. And they've done so to mostly record the valuable services of healthcare workers and that of the Catholic Church in providing service to people living with HIV everywhere. Whenever someone is hit hard, it is in the nature in which we are brought up. The first place we run to is the church. And sometimes we get there and what we need is not really spiritual. I remember once talking to a man of God, and I was very bitter and I was very angry. And I keep telling people, you need to get to that part of your life where you are so bitter that you hate God, and then redeem yourself back to probably understand it. And she kept telling me how, the grace of God, and that is not what I wanted to hear at the time. But the Catholic Church has been more than that to people living with HIV. It has not only been a source of spiritual nourishment, but it is a place where people go to for other needs, for clothes, for food, for someone to talk to, for support groups. And often they work with us to provide centers in which people living with HIV like me can be able to sit and not feel stigmatized. It is the one place where everything is real, and the most important thing matters. We are all human. And at the end of it all, we are not supposed to be judged. We're just supposed to be real and human. Therefore, it is with this honor that I echo the words of most of the writers in the book, that HIV programming and interventions need to focus on people living with HIV, and not only biomedical or medical interventions or epidemiological studies around it. People living with HIV are people placed in a lot or affected by a lot of social, cultural, and social economical factors in the environments in which they come from. So the book presents various ways and best practices for which programmers and scholars can begin to have conversations about this, and I think I'm very proud of that. Additionally, the book takes the journey 30 years since AIDS was first discovered in the world. And there has been communications going on. Things have changed. This journey has been long. It has been hard. There have been lots of sacrifices. We have lost so many people. We have seen despair, loss of hope. We have seen people move from normal to nothing. We have seen women bear the harshest of brands of this scourge. However, the book is taking readers through all this with the hope that as we begin to focus on what is new, people are able to understand that this journey is leading to stories of great hope, opportunities, and discoveries that could make things better. Notably, the HIV and AIDS epidemic has contributed immensely to shaping public health response, not only in Kenya, but in the world. Things are different now. How we speak about public health is different. HIV has made us confront issues. It has made us confront our cultures. It has made us confront some of the social economic issues we would rather have swept under the carpet. It has been an African thing to talk about certain things. It has been an African thing to talk about condoms. I grew up in a Catholic church. I told Pauline, I have never imagined, I haven't actually seen priests beyond, the ones that wear their robes. However, we have changed. Language has changed. It is embracive more of human rights. We no longer call each other the funny names. We have been faced with the realization that we have to treat people like human beings. And this has been because of the HIV and AIDS response. This book, among others that I have seen advertised here, and many more, will present with an array of opportunities for young people who are coming after us, for people who probably, like me, had no idea what this is, a rich resource for them to understand this journey and maybe to appreciate it better, and maybe to appreciate the work that the faith-based organizations and especially the Catholic Church has had in the HIV and AIDS response. Having said all that, the work is far from over. More people continue to be infected every day. Many people continue to die or to be exposed to human rights violations of various magnitudes day in, day out. I hope that as people begin to have conversations about this, and as the church becomes a bit more involved in these conversations, programmers and scholars will debate and deliberate on various more cost-effective ways and sustainable ways to address this pandemic. With the reducing donor fund, which mostly funds all our programs here, it is wise that we start to look at this a little differently. We need to start focusing more on what is sustainable and focusing more on what the communities themselves can be able to pick up and move from, so that it is more not donor-oriented. We are speaking one voice, as he has said, and I think Father Pachan has also said. We have seen emerging evidence of the use of ART in not only prolonging life, but also being very useful in preventing new infections. If we are able to all move collectively for advocacy, for investment in interventions with the highest impact. And if we speak that one language, then I believe it will be something that our governments would be, and I'm speaking in terms of African state here, would be able to look into so that we have funding directed internally and not depending only on donor fund for sustainable financing for interventions that have highest impact. In as much as there is no single entry in this book by a person living with HIV, I think in reading it, I have seen a challenge that NEFAC probably needs to take up. We may not have 100% scholars. This was more a scholarly book. But the HIV and AIDS movement is missing out on documentation of the movement itself. The stories are huge. The people who have paved way for us to even be able to stand here. There are many great men and women, some who have passed on, some who are still standing today, who have great stories and who we can learn from. And the only thing that we may probably want to bring to the table is something like that we all keep saying, we cannot be spoken for. Our lived experience. The science will be right. The science will give us the statistics. But it is in using our lived experience that we can be able then to have conversations on how to marry the science and the reality. So I'm taking this as a challenge back to NEFAC and to people living with HIV. And I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a relationship with AJAN. And considering we have seen fruitful and successful launch of this book, we can be able to learn from it and come up with a book or a documentation that would show the journey that people living with HIV have also taken. We have also grown in great leaps and bounds in ensuring that we are not only spoken for, we are not people put aside on corners, but we nowadays also stand on the podium or sit at high tables and contribute to policies that affect us. I think for me that is a great journey, and I am very grateful that AJAN took the opportunity to involve us in this launch. I believe that the book will be a good resource for people who may not understand the origin of this disease or appreciate its efforts by all stakeholders at all levels, faith-based organizations included, to understand and appreciate more where we have come from. So congratulations for the launch, and I hope that we are able to work more and have these conversations as we go on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Florence, for those very inspiring words, for the courage, the confidence, and the solidarity that you've shown us, and obviously for the gap that you've also mentioned that is in this book. No author among those who've written that we didn't get anybody living with HIV and AIDS. So probably that's something that we need to take into account for the future. But more so with your closing words, that we are not people who are there just to be spoken for. We are people who can stand up in a podium and speak about policies affecting people living with HIV and AIDS. So thank you very much for that courageous and very open and candid speech about your life, and also about representing so many other people who are living with HIV and AIDS. And as you may know as well, and some of the authors have pointed it out, that nowadays we use the term people living with HIV and AIDS are not HIV/AIDS victims, because as she just said, they're not victims, they're speaking for themselves, and neither are they simply sufferers or people who need your sympathy, but I think they're people who are positively living with HIV and AIDS and raising awareness about it, and also encouraging others to just take conscious of it. At this juncture, I would like to invite our keynote speaker. Her name is Professor Mary Getui, who is the chair of the National AIDS Control Council, director of the Directorate of the Quality Assurance here at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, I should also add in her CV that she was my lecturer about 15 years ago. Thank you very much. And up to 2010, she was a lecturer at Kenyatta University. But also she's done a lot of community work in relation to HIV and AIDS work and other social services. And in 2009, she was awarded the Moran of the Burning Spear. She could probably tell us something a little bit about that. The Moran of the Burning Spear, which is a presidential award, and that was awarded by President Kibaki in 2009. She also has an honorary degree and Doctor of Human Letters from DePaul University. Welcome, Professor Mary Getui.
Good afternoon. A warm welcome to Queer. This afternoon we have several activities going on. Our Vice Chancellor could not be here because we have the Cardinal Tunga Scholarship program going on in town, program where we raise fees for our needy students. And it was difficult for many members to be here. But as you can see, I belong to this community and we welcome you in a very special way. And thank you for choosing Queer for the launch of this book. I don't know what to say after what has gone on, but I believe I'll have a few insights. I've gone through the book, and I'd like to congratulate those who have contributed to it. And sometimes the contributors don't do it alone. In fact, many times, there are others behind the scenes, and we also recognize them this afternoon. I bring you greetings from the National AIDS Control Council, and this is the body which coordinates HIV activities in Kenya. And I'm glad to report that many times we have interacted with my younger sister here on these activities. I will simply, I think I'll ignore talking about the book because a lot has been said about it, but I want to make some connections between this book and what is happening, and also some lessons. Maybe before I go on, it's good that I also recognize my teacher, Sister Kechiona, who is seated right here. And one of the contributors, Mary Owens, was my teacher and my principal. That will tell you where my formation came from, the Loreto sisters. The word conversation has kept on coming. If we had time, and because I'm a teacher, I would have asked you to take a few minutes and say something to the person sitting next to you. Because conversation breaks the ice. Conversation brings us together, and conversation makes each one of us a key player. In the book, I think Mombe says the idea was hatched through conversation, talking to others. He highlights about 4 key people at the beginning, and the conference itself was a conversation among experts and thinkers. And I want to ask, who of us here is not a thinker? Therefore meaning that each one of us can actually make a contribution. In my work at the National AIDS Control Council, we try to find out what is it that is happening in other countries which could be reported as success stories. In Ethiopia, where a lot of good work is going on, one of the reasons for their success is community conversations. Community conversations right from the village all the way to the top. At the end of my remarks, I'm going to ask, what is your story as far as HIV and AIDS are concerned? Maybe I will leak this exam, because I'm already saying that in conversation, we can also write our story. The second element I would like to look at is the question of time. And I'm reminded of my friend, Joe. We worked together. I met him, and I didn't recognize him. I'm talking about 15 or more years ago, when we didn't have ARVs, when care and support was very challenged and challenging. I couldn't recognize my friend. He touched me and said, "Mary, it's me, your friend Joe." And I looked at him up and down, and I said, "Actually, yes." I kept visiting him until he passed away. And I remember his last words to me, that he hoped that in time to come, there will be medicine. You know, we couldn't call it ARVs or ART, but he simply said that he hoped that in days to come, there will be medicine. Time can bring us hope. Time can make things different. As we speak, in our country, we have about 800,000 people on treatment, many more requiring it but not able to access it. I think for my friend Joe, time has something to offer. I have a book which I bought, I think about 2 years ago. And 2 years ago is significant because 30 years since the first cases on HIV. And this book, the title is Taking a Long-Term View of AIDS. Further, it has a little title again, or subtitle, the AIDS 2031 Consortium. In other words, what will be the story 50 years since the first case was identified? A doctor friend of mine, very interesting, very insightful. I gained a lot when I spent time with him. He gave us a theory some time ago on time and age. And he said between 0 and 25, it is a very slippery period of our lives. We are not very clear. We have very many dreams and ambitions. Those of you from Kenya, you would remember an advert we had many years ago that when I grow up, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a pilot. And maybe that's the age, 0 to 25. The realities have not struck. 25 to 35, we start realizing that we are actually getting old and time is going. It may be too late because there are things which we ought to have done between 0 and 25. 35 to 45 is a very busy time. Am I talking about your life? Yes? 35 to 45 is very busy. Now you are into your vocation, you are into your family, you are into career, and a lot of things are happening. It's a very busy time. 45 to 55, you suddenly realize that time has gone. And retirement starts knocking round the corner. Then 55 and beyond, you might be forgotten or you might be remembered. Forgotten because you have retired, remembered because probably you have made a contribution somewhere and somebody says, let's look for such a person. Maybe they have something to share with us. So for the consortium, they're saying we need to take a long-term view. What we do today will determine the age and all these other issues I've talked about of HIV and AIDS at age 50, 2031. Time has a story to tell. At the beginning, the 1980s, 1990s, in fact, that's why the council was formed, 1999, because there was a lot of fear, a lot of mystery. We could remember that we buried in black polythene bags. We also buried deep. Fear and mystery. Then openness. And my sister here, those you are a little younger, there are those who have gone before you. At the council, we have representation of people living with HIV and AIDS. This openness is what has brought us to where we are now. Roberto, I had it in my notes, I didn't copy from you. But we are now at a time when we are taking things for granted. Because we know, but I'm later going to say that probably we don't know. And a lot of complacency. Actually, as a council, we are being challenged. Where is visibility? And that's where we are very grateful that such a launch contributes towards bringing visibility. It's not that things are not happening. It's not that work is not going on, but our attention has shifted. A very tricky and a difficult time. Because when we become complacent, then we may ignore certain very strong realities. Something else I see about time is that we can advertise that we are coming to do a launch. We are free. And for me, there are several significant things about this book, which I consider as a step forward. The contributors in the book are drawn from the Catholic fraternity. The book has been done by the Paulines, and today we are launching it at Queer. For a long time, the church closed its eyes to the reality of this condition. We said these are things of the world. While we are opening up, stigma and discrimination continue. At the council, we get reports from various parts of this country where members of the family will say, we don't know you, and the person is actually ostracized. And I think Anami would agree with that. It is still an issue, stigma and discrimination. We have learned at the council that the discrimination and stigma may not necessarily be coming from elsewhere, but from the individual who is infected and also the families that are affected. What I'm saying is that time has given us mileage, and we need to be appreciative of that. I'd like to dwell a little bit on faith. Some of you may be familiar with Peter Okalet from Uganda. And we know that Uganda has had its story. Peter Okalet was working in the hospitals in Uganda in the 1980s. And this is when HIV and AIDS was at the climax in that country. Peter has written a book. Maybe I could just say from doctor to theologian. Why did Peter do this? When he was attending to one of the patients, he did all he could with his medical skills. And there was this patient, John, who asked him very many challenging questions. And Peter Okalet left a job as a doctor and came to Kenya to study theology to see whether he could serve better. I'm just trying to say that the contributions from this book are probably an answer to the questions that John was asking. Maybe I'm going to repeat what others have said before, but the church continues to play a very significant role. Now, for us to come here, probably we received the card or we saw an advert, and we have very many priests here. Do you invite people to come to your churches on Sunday? Tomorrow, because I'm a Seventh-day Adventist, I plan to go to church. No pastors invited me there. The church has got an opportunity where we come when we are not invited and where we want to look for answers. At the National AIDS Control Council, as of now, I think we expect some changes. But as of now, we have a board of 17, and 3 slots are for the faith communities. We have SUPKEM, these are the Muslims. We have NCCK, the Protestants, and we have the Episcopal Conference. Is that what we call them? Yes. This goes to show the weight that is put on issues of faith and issues of church and HIV. Under the secretariat itself at NAC, we have a desk that is committed and committing to issues of faith and HIV. So we go back to the story of Peter Okalet, that we cannot talk about HIV and AIDS outside the church, outside faith. It has already been said that it's a multi-sectoral issue and we require a multi-sectoral response. Faith goes with hope. And I find that HIV has challenged language. At the National AIDS Control Council, our brand is Maisha. And those of us who understand that language, it is life. And yet when we are talking about HIV and AIDS, despite ARVs, we are talking about threat to life. And yet we're talking about Maisha. In May, we had a conference, and you'll just listen to these words. The theme of the conference was accelerating progress towards the zero. The drivers here, when you accelerate, you are moving forward. Accelerating towards zero. At that conference, I was sitting with some doctors and I asked them, why do you say this person is positive? Why don't we say they are negative? What I'm trying to say is that as we talk about HIV and AIDS, and it has been very well articulated in the book, we need to have a positive approach. And that is why even the language is a little bit upside down, but bringing that element of hope, accelerating towards zero. One of the challenges I find as a teacher is to award marks, And I remember one case where this fellow wrote really badly, deserved a 0. But when I remembered the contributions this person makes in class, I cannot account for it, So 0 is not very positive. But in HIV, we are talking about accelerating towards 0. 0 discrimination, 0 related deaths, and 0 discrimination and stigma. And I think this is in line with the vision of AJAN. Keeping records, I think, is something else that I got from the book. In the foreword, AJAN says, or the sense you get from what he has written, is that we need to document. That there was a time when the church said, Jesus documents for us. We don't need to tell the world what we are doing. But documents are very important. Though one of my professors at one point told me, I'd just taken up a new office at the university. He was my teacher. And he told me, Mary, one of the things I would like you to observe is write as few memos as possible. People resent memos, and especially personal memos. You didn't return marks in time, you didn't attend class, invigilation did not go on. Maybe those are negative records. So AJAN says it's good for us to document and share that which we are doing. The books we write, and I see several writers here, the books we write, they outlive us. One of the questions I ask my students is, how long would you like to live? The older they are, the more they push the time. I don't know when I taught you, Omondi, how old you were, but if I'd asked that question, you would have given me the age at which you are now. We are not going to be here forever. One way or another, we live. How we live is not what I would like to discuss today, but what I would like to emphasize is what we write outlives us. And so this book is going to outlive the writers. This book remains a heritage that we can refer to. So, which is your story? I'll keep on going back to that. When I received the first copy of this book, I wrote back to AJAN and said, could you please give us another copy for our resource center at the National AIDS Control Council, so that others may hear this story. Indeed, Florence has already mentioned that there is a gap. The voice of the people who are living positively. But as I went through the book, I could hear the voices of people living positively being reflected. This is a record that is going to be very useful. And I want to believe that we are going to share it with other faith groups because we learn from each other. As I finish, I'd like to share that there are many challenges with regard to response to HIV and AIDS. It has already been mentioned, indeed, 85% of the funds in Kenya are from elsewhere. That makes it very uncomfortable. A very frequent word you will hear at the council is when the taps are closed, what is going to happen? It's a very big challenge. Yes, that is money we're talking about, but we also want to acknowledge the many groups, and even as we started earlier, there were a few slides which were showing us what is going on at the community level. This work has taken me to places of this country where I think I would not have gone. I come back challenged, but at the same time motivated that there are people who are doing work, not because somebody is going to pay them, women groups that come together, youth groups that come together for social support. We don't count that when we look at the money, but that is a contribution we would like to acknowledge. Right now, there are high-level efforts that our country may put on in a little more in the kitty. A big challenge again is on stigma and discrimination. Issues of human rights and justice were mentioned earlier. And as of now, at least the records that we have, Kenya is one of those countries that have come up with a tribunal that looks at issues of discrimination at work, at home, and you just visit them, you are not going to pay for it, and they will listen to your issue and they will help you. And you know, sometimes it's not because you are going to get an injection that is going to help you. You are not going to get a job for your mother so that she can support the many orphans that have been left, but you're just going to get somebody who will listen to you. We go back to the issue of conversation. As the council, we also have a challenge that much as we call ourselves a coordinating body, we don't have the legal mandate to do that. That's why I said we expect some changes. We have a bill in Parliament right now. When that bill goes through, then we believe that the council will be able even to put more challenge on duplication, on who is doing what in our society. And we want to appreciate that at community level, we have networks there. Again, representation is required from faith communities, and we've seen a lot of good work going on there. As I come to the end, what remains for us to do, challenged from this book and others, is that we need to continue thinking, critical, innovative thinking. I was surprised that the book I mentioned earlier, it has no faith element or angle in it, but as they are making their recommendations, they are saying that we also need to look above or look up. They did not qualify what looking up means, but I think this is credit and recognition that of ourselves, there is nothing we can do. The God who has intervened in the past, I think the same God will intervene even in the days to come. We need to debate. I think it was in April, we had a debate here, organized by the council, and this was the second one. We are going to public universities, not really public, we are going to universities, and we are coming up with topics where we would like debate. You know, debate is not that I'm the winner or I'm the loser, but from debate, our thinking is challenged. And I believe that when we come out of a debate, it opens of our horizons. We need to continue asking what works and what doesn't work this far in the interventions that we have had, and what can we do differently so that we can change things. As I come to the end, given the audience that we have here, many of us, if I was to ask you, how old are you? It may not be very easy for that to come out. Children less than 10 are very quick to tell you, no, I'm 3, I'm 4, I'm 5. As the birthdays and World AIDS Days come, we would like to see that as HIV advances in years, AIDS, that will become like the birthdays, that we will have less glamour because new infections will be reduced. There'll be less glamour because there'll be less discrimination, less deaths. That could be our wish as we continue. I was challenged by a song, and I'm just going to share a few lines from a song by Anne Smith, and her question is, how far from home? And her reflections, I think, will go well to some our being here. How far from home, an end to HIV, positive living, AIDS. So how far from home? And this song says, the long dark night is almost gone, the morning soon will break. Then weep no more, but speed thy flight, with hope's bright star, thy guiding ray. With courage bold, the sword will wield, the battle is not long. Then weep no more, but well endure the conflict till the work is done. For this we know, the prize is sure, when victory is won. Then weep no more, then weep no more. The whole creation is waiting, it groans, to hear the trumpet sound. Our trials will be past, our joys will be complete, we will be safe. That's our desire, and I believe that this book has done that. Thank you very much for your time.
As we close this session, it is my privilege to offer a vote of thanks. On behalf of AJAN and our great partners, Porain's Publications, as well as the entire, let me call it fraternity of actors involved in the battle against AIDS who are present, and on my own behalf too, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to all of you who have made it here today. A special thanks goes to the speakers for their constant work in fighting AIDS and for sharing their thoughts with us today. I express our heartfelt appreciation to Professor Mary Getui, who has taken a time out of her busy schedule to be here and to impart some of her valuable knowledge and expertise to us. We are equally grateful to Ms. Florence Anam for her openly sharing experience. We may not understand firsthand the challenge she faces, but we can see and relate to the fruits of her wonderful work. To our host, the Catholic University of Eastern Africa, especially the Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellors, and all university officials, our sincere gratitude for your hospitality. I also take this opportunity to extend our heart thanks to Festus, the events organizer of the university, for his perfect logistical support and guidance that were so important to make this launch a success. Well, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, an event like this does not happen overnight. Every motivated and dedicated team set the plans into motion weeks ago, working very hard to organize the launch. This would not have been possible without the backing of the Pauline's publication, who published the book and are here today in support of its sale. The Celsius Restaurant at Aquia, the Guru's Theatre Group, Majis Kangemi, for ushering, as well as the entire AJAN House team. I say to you all, Asante Sana. And nearly last but not means the least, I turn to one of our own, Father Elias Omondi. Thank you for being an excellent master of ceremonies this afternoon. Asante sana na baraka tele. My last thank you goes to the contributors to this book, most of who are not here today, but whose dedicated writings have made the book the wonderful resource it is. Having fed our minds, it is time to take care of our stomachs. We invite you to join us in sharing some of refreshments while buying a book and getting it signed by the authors. Thank you very much, and God bless you.
Baba yetu